So we're moving now from the receptive phase to the productive phase, and scaffolding output means supporting our students' production of language. So the language we want them to be able to communicate orally and also in written form. And you should remember this from the previous presentation, and the same metaphor applies really. Before students can become fluent communicators and produce the language in a spontaneous way, i.e. riding a bicycle without the stabilizers, without the little support wheels, we need to give them some help to get started. Now, the common theme running through the scaffolding of output is this idea of creating favorable conditions, creating the optimum conditions for students to be able to communicate. And this is actually a common theme throughout the whole subject. Now, if we give our students time to think and plan and prepare what they're going to say or what they're going to write, then obviously we give them a much better chance of success. If you think yourself of a situation where you're asked to talk about something spontaneously, tell me about this. Part of the problem may not be necessarily your level of English. It could also be the fact that you don't have any ideas at that moment. So giving learners time to think about what they're going to say and how they're going to say it gives us a better chance that they will be successful. So any activity where we would like students to speak in particular, we need to give them some time in advance to think about what they're going to say. There's an old idea that practice makes perfect, and it's important that we also give our students time to practice when we're asking them to produce particularly spoken output. So there's a technique we can use which is called think, pair, share. Related to the previous point, when we want students to produce some oral language, we give them some time to think in advance what they're going to say and how they're going to say it. Then, in pairs with a partner, they can tell their partner their ideas, their opinions, what they've thought, and in this way they're practicing in a situation which is quite low stress because they're only having to do it with one partner. After this is the third phase, share, and here you might conduct a discussion or speak in front of the whole class, but it's not the same being put on the spot and being asked to speak spontaneously in front of the whole class as it is having time to prepare, time to practice with a partner, and then when you have some confidence that you've been able to do it with a partner, do it in front of the whole class. Now that's think, pair, share, but there's also a further step which is think, pair, square, share. So the first two stages are the same. You think, you practice with a partner, and then partners get together with other partners so that we have four, and again they can share their ideas. So they've thought, they've practiced with a partner, they've practiced with three other people, and then if they would like to share something with the whole group, it's not such a high stress situation because they've been able to practice twice in advance. This is another key idea. Model what you want them to do. So if you're asking students to produce some spoken output, let's say a mini presentation on one of the topics from the science book, then if the teacher does the task themselves in front of the class, the learners have a very good idea of what they are expected to do and the kind of level that they have to do it at. So modelling on the part of the teacher is a very good technique because students will complete tasks more effectively if they know exactly what you want them to do. Again, connected to the previous point, if you give students a rubric for a speaking task before they have to do the speaking task, or a written task for that matter, then again they have a very good idea of exactly what it is they have to do. So between the teacher modelling the task and students being given a rubric so they know what constitutes completing the task successfully or with partial success, so they know how they're going to be assessed, then it will give them a much better chance of doing the task well. Here you have a couple of examples of rubrics. They can be quite quick and simple to produce. All you need to do is think about what you would like to see your students do, and you can write descriptors, you can attach a numerical value, you can put smiley faces, neutral faces, sad faces, etc. And this gives students a very good idea in advance of what it is we're asking them to do. It also helps you to standardize their correction, and it also helps you to be a little bit more objective. Returning to this golden rule of creating favorable conditions. Again, practice makes perfect. If we give students the chance to repeat an activity, then they often do it better the second or the third time because they've had the chance to practice and to refine. So we have to think a little bit here about assessing students, giving students tasks, not only so that we can give them a mark or decide how good or how successful they are, but also the process, the journey is important. So if a student doesn't do a speaking task particularly well the first time, why not give them an opportunity to do it a second or a third time and learn from their experience? This is particularly good in small group work or in pair work, where you can get students to do a task with a partner and then repeat exactly the same task with a different partner. And this is good because it also gives learners a sense of progression, because they noticed the difference between how they did it the first time and how they did it the second or the third time. And if they notice they had any difficulties, this is where they can also ask the teacher to give them some help with vocabulary or grammar or pronunciation or expressing something that they weren't able to express. And we've seen this before in the first unit of the subject. Obviously there is an affective side to speaking in a foreign language, so we have to make sure we praise not only good work but also effort, so that we create a positive disposition on the part of students towards speaking in English. We need to give positive reinforcement. Favourable conditions means low risk and low stress. So although we mentioned before think, pair, square, share, with the ultimate goal of speaking in front of the whole class with confidence, if we can organise activities where students work in small groups, you can perhaps organise a carousel lesson or a corners lesson where groups of students are simultaneously occupied doing different activities. And maybe one group is the group that has the teacher's attention because that activity is a spoken output activity. Well, if that group is small, perhaps 4, 6, 8 students rather than 25 students, then the individual only has to speak in front of a small group. This reduces the risk and reduces the stress, and is more likely to result in the student being willing and able to speak. So we've concentrated so far principally on spoken production, but what about written production? What about written output? Well, this is quite similar really. Again, back to the metaphor of the little wheels, the stabilising wheels on the bike. Sentence stems. If we want students to write something, we can perhaps give them a formula where the sentences have already been started by the teacher. So this could be a photocopy or a worksheet. where students simply have to complete the sentences. It's much less challenging to have to complete a sentence that's already been started with the correct information or with an admissible idea than it is to ask students to write from scratch, from zero, starting from nothing. Now, a more complex way of doing this is also writing frames. Now, all types of text have certain characteristics and a certain structure. An academic essay begins with an introduction, it has body paragraphs, it has a conclusion. Instructions on a piece of IKEA furniture, they follow a certain convention. The same is true of things like recipes. The same is true of newspaper reports. So by giving writing frames, we give the students a structure within which they are able to add their own language and produce their own language. Now, a good way to work on this is also analysing example texts. So if you want to, at a very high level, analyse an academic essay, you'll see that good academic essays use certain type of language and are structured in a certain way, and they all have this in common. If you look at a newspaper report, you'll see exactly the same thing. If you look at a recipe or a set of instructions, you'll see exactly the same thing. If you look at an art review or a review of a film, again, you'll see certain language is always used. So a great activity to help students produce language as we would wish is to draw their attention to the style and characteristics of certain types of text. This is working on literacy. And although they're not very clear, you have a couple of examples of what I mean by writing frames here. Now, you can find writing frames on the internet. You can do a simple search when you think of a text type. The one on the left is a newspaper article, and there are spaces for a picture, there are spaces for the title, the headline, there are spaces for the paragraphs and notes on the kind of information that the writer needs to include here. The one on the right hand side is a recipe, and again you have a space for a picture, space for the ingredients, space for the steps, and then at the bottom the kind of language that you need to use for organizing the steps. Now, these are quite simple to create, but as I say, you can find and adapt many examples of these also on the internet, and these help students to produce, but this is also working on literacy. It's recognition of characteristics of texts and how they function. And this is really putting it all together. This is both input and output, and it goes back a little bit to the idea I just mentioned about analysing the characteristics of texts. Now, although it's not very clear here, you get an overall idea. There's a description of a painting on the first page on the left, and there are lots of words and expressions which have been highlighted in 4 different colours, and in 5 different colours rather. And in the centre page here, you'll see that you have the colours, and you also have categories of types of language, of powerful adjectives, of specific art-related words, etc. And what the student has to do is identify from the example words in the text which ones belong to which category. Underneath you have another description of a text. What the student has to do here is to identify the types of information which are in each of the paragraphs. And on the right hand side, the third page, you have certain characteristics and types of information which are included in text, in both texts, or one or the other of the texts, and they need to identify them and simply tick. And then underneath they have some kind of structure for writing their own description of a picture. So what we're doing here is we're analysing types of text and working from receptive skills, that's understanding the text, identifying the characteristics and the structure, therefore working on literacy, and then finally moving towards producing a text which has similar characteristics. So, to finish, It's quite simple, very much like